Go inside the Crimson Tide. Tider Insider TV with Rodney Orr and Gary Harris.
You know what? I don't really care about that. I mean, I've been sitting in that room for 2 days now watching film on trying to get enough guys on the pitch guy. All right, you figure it out and come tell me what it is, because I don't know and don't really care. All I know is we just need to take care of what we control, and what we control is how we play. All right, and my contribution to that is how do we get the team ready to play. So I could care less about that, because I don't understand it to start with.
Nick Saban on the BCS and Bama's chances of making it to the national championship game. Good evening, everybody, and welcome in to Tider Insider TV, presented by Buffalo Rock, alongside Rodney Orr from TiderInsider.com. I'm Gary Harris. Once again tonight, enjoying ice-cold Pepsi Cola. Some people have been emailing me. They want to know if you're ever going to take a drink of it on the air.
Well, maybe one day.
He does drink it during the breaks, I can tell you that. Well, what a difference a week makes, Rodney. As we take a look at the updated BCS standings, Stanford and Boise State both go down. Alabama was already number 3, but now it's obvious that the Crimson Tide is only one loss away from getting into the BCS championship game. If either LSU or Oklahoma State fall, the Tide would be in pretty good shape. Now, Nick Saban may not want to talk about the BCS standings, Rod, but everybody else does. There's no doubt about that. And if Alabama wins out, Oklahoma State loses. Let's not even put LSU in the equation yet. In your mind, does Alabama get the rematch against the Bayou Bengals in the BCS championship game in New Orleans, assuming LSU wins out as well?
My question to you is, how could they not?
I agree.
I mean, when you look at it, Oregon gets blasted by LSU. It was actually a 40-20 game until Oregon scores a late touchdown and makes it 40-27, I guess, somewhat respectable. You look at Oklahoma, they lost to Texas Tech, a team that in the last 3 games since that win over Oklahoma has been outscored 156-33. They've lost 6 of their last 7 games. Might add, the only game that they've won in that stretch was over Oklahoma, at Norman? Was it at Norman? I think the game was at Norman.
What, the Texas State game?
Yeah, it was
at Norman.
I mean, it's at Norman. So, you know, you're talking about an incredibly bad loss. Alabama takes the #1 team in the country. They end up in what's basically a tie, going to overtime and lose by a field goal. So, and Alabama, if most people watch the game, knows that Alabama really outplayed LSU.
You know what's amazing to me is just a couple of weeks ago before they played, everybody was saying that Alabama and LSU clearly the best 2 teams in the country. Clearly. Well, we knew one of those teams had to lose in that game because there's no more ties. I mean, you go to overtime. They go to overtime. They're separated by 3 points. Now there's a lot of talk about, well, if Oklahoma State loses and Oklahoma wins out, could Oklahoma jump Alabama? Could Oregon jump Alabama? It really seems crazy based on what we were just hearing a couple of weeks ago. I'm with you. Clearly, to me, if there's one undefeated team and it's LSU and everybody else has 1 loss, Alabama gets the rematch.
Well, and you know what was amazing was before the game, people talked about a possible rematch. They said if it's a close game, if we were to go into overtime, we could very well see a rematch. And now a lot of people are trying to discourage a rematch, but those same people, or a lot of those same people, are talking about Oregon getting a rematch, which, you know, is difficult to understand. But anyway, you know, if you look at it, Gary, I think with all the things that we've talked about, if Alabama were to win out, I really wouldn't see how they could not get the rematch.
All right. What about this scenario? What if Arkansas knocks off LSU or Georgia knocks off LSU in the SEC championship game and Oklahoma State's undefeated? Would Alabama, in your mind, jump LSU under either one of those scenarios and play Oklahoma State for the championship? Or would you see possibly LSU or even Arkansas being ahead of Alabama?
Well, I could not understand how Arkansas could be ahead of Alabama because, I mean, you're talking about a team that Alabama beat by 4 touchdowns, basically 24 points, 38-14, and dominated the game. I think Arkansas had, 209 yards of offense, maybe the lowest output in Bobby Petrino's career at Arkansas. So, again, I don't see how Arkansas could now. Could LSU? Very possibly. You know, we'll see. We'd have to see how that would go. But, you know, you would think that at number 3, Alabama would probably move up at least 1 spot, but you never know.
And finally, Nick Saban's reaction to it all about what you would expect from him. You just can't, they can't worry about it. They got 2 games to play, and that's really all they can do.
Well, and again, you know, we know the Georgia Southern game should be obviously a pretty good win, but you know, the Auburn game is extremely important. You know, you've got to sew up the state first, and I know you agree with that, Gary.
Well, absolutely. That's a real important game for Alabama, particularly with the success that Auburn's had in the last 10 years or so. They've really pretty much dominated the series. All right, let's look back before we look forward to Georgia Southern. The Mississippi State game. You know, the offense against LSU moved the ball some but could not generate a touchdown. 2 field goals. That's why they lost the game. The defense in that game, plenty good enough to win. Then against Mississippi State in the first half, very sluggish again offensively. They did pick it up some in the second half, but A.J. McCarron seems to have regressed a little bit the last couple of weeks. Your evaluation of Alabama's offense at Mississippi State?
Well, you saw it. You know, they struggled running the ball a little bit early, and you know, Mississippi State, though, let's be honest, they do have a good defensive team. I know that they've given up some points and some yardage this year, but at the same time, we figured that they would play their best game of the year, and they did. And we also assumed that Alabama probably would have a little bit of a rebounding issue, which they did. But I think once Alabama got in the groove and started playing, they played a lot better on offense. They started moving the ball, started running the ball in the second half, which I think was obviously very important. There you see Trent going in, stepped out at the 4 there. Eddie Lacy seems to be back to himself a little bit. So, again, that running attack got going. You talked about A.J. McCarron. Yeah, he did struggle. He missed some open guys. But, you know, he's going to have to work his way through it.
But on the other side of the ball, dominating is all you can say about the Alabama defense. They finally gave up a touchdown in the fourth quarter to Mississippi State. That was following a 69-yard kickoff return. That was the first touchdown they had given up since the first quarter of the Ole Miss game. That was a span of 10 quarters plus an overtime against LSU that they had not given up a touchdown, and probably would have gotten the shutout had it not been for the long kickoff return. They held Mississippi State to some unbelievable numbers. 12 yards rushing, 131 yards total offense. That's the lowest in the Dan Mullen era. Rodney, I've got to ask you, when you take into context the way the game's played, and I know everything's relative. It's hard to compare defenses from 92 to this one, or obviously 79, or certainly going back to the 1960s. But with the way the game's played today, is this one of the best defenses you've ever seen?
Yes.
The numbers they're putting up defensively, 7 points a game. In this era, where teams score routinely 50, 60 points a game.
Yeah, very difficult, Gary, not to say it isn't. Because, I mean, when you look at it, you know, they do an incredible job against the run. I'm not sure what Mississippi State's numbers were there, but, I mean, just an incredible job against the run. They put a lot of pressure on Mississippi State. I think they had, 5 sacks, you know, forced some turnovers.
Yeah, and 12 yards rushing.
Yeah, so again, I think when you look at it, I mean, it's incredible. And you mentioned, I think the stat we had talked about the other day, they've only given up 14 points one time in a game. What's that, the first time?
Since 1974, when Oklahoma did it, that in 10 games, a team has not had another team score more than 14 points against them.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's an incredible stat when you talk about this day and time and these offenses. And, you know, just to point it out, when you look at Mississippi State, when McCarron was intercepted, returned it to the 4-yard line. They ended up trying to field goal, from the 12 and missing the field goal. So, you know, again, you really have gotten to the point, Gary, where you're surprised if someone scores on it.
That's right. I was shocked Mississippi State did score even after the kickoff return, and it took a nice throw and catch on a slant for Mississippi State to get points. Well, we've covered the offense, we've covered the defense, but what's up with the Tide specialist? And let's say specialist, not special teams. Nick Saban says there's a big difference. When Tider Insider TV returns, we'll take a look at the Tide's struggles with the place-kicking aspect. Also still to come, as Gene Stallings used to say, if you don't think a game like Saturday's is a big one, just lose it, and you'll find out just how big it is. We'll discuss Alabama and Georgia Southern. That's later. And we'll be, of course, taking your phone calls and emails as well. You're watching the show that takes you inside the Crimson Tide, Tider Insider TV.
There's a difference between special teams and specialist. And a lot of people just think that if your specialists don't perform well, that means your special teams were bad. And that's not necessarily right. It means what it means.
It usually does. Back with Rodney Orr, I'm Gary Harris. Tider Insider TV presented by Buffalo Rock, bottlers of fine Pepsi-Cola products. Really, really good. Really good, nice cold. All right. I do understand there's a difference between special teams and kicking aspect. And the special teams has been solid all year. The return game's been good. The coverage game has been good. They did give up the 69-yard kickoff return that led to Mississippi State's only points that I mentioned on Saturday night. But the kicking aspect, Rodney, Coach Saban says you can't put it all on the kickers, but if they keep missing them, people are going to keep talking about it. 2 of 6 against LSU, 1 of 3 against Mississippi State. And they're struggling. There's no doubt about it. Now, this effort here, a long field goal by Cade Foster, he hit it well, but he missed it. Then Shelley missed a short one before making a short one. what gives? I mean, what can they do to get this corrected? Bobby Williams is the special teams coach. I know they've got other people on that staff that understand a lot about kicking. Can they get this thing fixed?
Well, I think Shelley hit a kick later.
He did.
And I think that, he's been fairly consistent. Again, he did have one blocked against LSU. He also hit one in that game, and, he missed one, but he did come back and hit one. And again, Foster has struggled. And I think if he could ever get into a rhythm and hit a couple, I think he would probably gain some confidence. And I think that's what it is. A lot of it is confidence. Had an opportunity to talk to one of the top high school kickers in the country who's committed to Alabama. And he talked about how, watching Foster, you could tell that he had lost his confidence. And I think that's a big part of it.
Well, speaking of that, I had a former Alabama kicker call me, and I'll leave him unnamed because he asked me to. But he said Cade Foster it's a technique. He's losing all his power right before he kicks the football. He said he could straighten him out in 5 minutes. I guess maybe NCAA rules prohibit that, or maybe the coaching staff doesn't want somebody to come in. But, do you think it's a form thing, a technique thing? You said the high school kicker told you the same thing. You could tell that.
Well, again, he thought it was a confidence issue, but certainly, maybe a former kicker would know. But you would also think that Nick Saban and Bobby Williams and those who work with the kickers, know what they're looking at. And it could be, Gary, that once he gets on the field, he's doing something different than he's doing in practice or something that he's talking about. So, again, that's a possibility as well. So it might not be that he's been neglected in terms of they worked with him with what he's doing wrong. It may just be he's not taking it to the field.
All right, again, Saturday night, the kickoffs were short. He was kicking to a spot on the field, and other than the one return, the coverage was good. All right, up next, you might not think Saturday's game is a big one, but it's actually a matchup of two teams with only one loss. We'll preview the Tide's contest against Georgia Southern. Also, Alabama's basketball team is off to a fast start. And we'll get to your phone call. You can give us a ring there at 205-348-WVUA. That's 348-9882. Or email us at TITV@WVUATV.com. We're coming right back to talk about Alabama's next game against Georgia Southern. Stay with us.